In the Hamilton song, Eye of the Hurricane, when describing how he came to America, Hamilton says, "Total strangers, moved to kindness by my story, raised enough money to book passage on a ship that was New York bound." The most inspiring characters are those who are themselves inspired, those who are, as the song says, moved to kindness. If a character starts out noble and heroic, it's not a surprise when they do something noble and heroic. But a character moved or prompted to take heroic action is truly inspiring. It's a conflict between the selfish and the noble, with the noble winning. So what does this look like? What is the scene construction of a character moved to heroism? While some may think of battle scenes with courageous soldiers, or superheroes stepping up to fight an evil villain, for my money, there's no better example of a protagonist moved to heroism than George Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life.
My name's George Bailey.
So today we'll be breaking down the boardroom scene from this film, tracking George's back and forth struggle toward heroism. Spoiler warning for It's a Wonderful Life. Unless it's a James Bond movie, we don't want to see static characters. We want to see characters who move, characters who change. George Bailey is the ultimate everyman protagonist. A good but imperfect man who time and again is called upon to sacrifice his own desires for the good of those around him. What makes George such a compelling protagonist is that he's not Superman, a courageous, noble-hearted superhuman who will always rise selflessly to the occasion. From the beginning of the film, George is eager to escape his hometown of Bedford Falls and make a name for himself, but is hampered by the continual demands placed on him by others. While generally a good person, George has moments of frustration, discouragement, anger, and selfishness. In other words, he is distinctly human. It's this genuine humanness that makes us root for him to rise above his own self-interest and strive for heroism. In the scene in question, George is attending a board meeting of the Bailey Building and Loan on behalf of his recently deceased father, Peter Bailey. It was Peter's desire to give the people of Bedford Falls the ability to own their own home, leading him to start the company. The purpose of the board meeting is to decide whether to keep the company going or shut it down. Mr. Potter, the villainous businessman who owns half the town, wants to exterminate the Building and Loan, leaving him with unchallenged power over the housing market.
I claim this institution is not necessary to this town. Therefore, Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to dissolve this institution and turn its assets and liabilities over to the receiver.
George's uncle, Billy Bailey, wants to stop him, but doesn't possess the skills to oppose Potter. George, who is about to leave for college, doesn't care either way. An important aspect of scene structure is the understanding that good stories are never about people fighting each other. They are about ideas fighting each other, with characters serving as the face or embodiment of those ideas. Our villain, Potter, represents the idea that people are commodities and should be treated as such. Until his death, Peter Bailey represented the antithesis, that people are human beings and deserve decency and respect. This clashing of ideals put Potter and Peter at war with each other. Now that Peter is dead, Potter, and the ideas he represents, stand unopposed. Keep this point in mind as we progress through the scene.
Very well. In that case, I'll ask the two executive officers to withdraw.
It's important to note where our protagonist starts this scene. George doesn't want to be in this board meeting. He doesn't want to work at the Building and Loan or remain in Bedford Falls. As stated earlier, scenes are about our characters moving. At this point in the story, George is motivated by self, his own goals, and his own agenda. Even as Potter is talking about shutting down the business, George is moving for the door. He's ready to be out of this place and starting his own life. But watch what happens when Potter begins insulting one of George's friends.
Now, you take this loan here to Ernie Bishop. You know, that fellow that sits around all day on his brains in his taxi, you know. I happen to know the bank turned down this loan.
What is it that gives George pause? It's the disparaging of another human being. For as much as he wants to pursue his own way, there's something in him which can't abide the mistreatment of a fellow human being. It's a moving, a sliding of the scale toward nobility. This isn't the full awakening of George's heroism, only the stirring. He's still at the door, still waiting to make his escape. He's risen to the defense of a friend, but that's all. He remains soft-spoken and reserved, not looking to take on Potter or rock the boat. That is, until Potter attacks George's father.
And all because a few starry-eyed dreamers like Peter Bailey stir 'em up and fill their head with a lot of impossible ideas. Now, I say...
Just a minute now, hold on.
The moment George turns back from the door is the turning point of the entire scene and his movement as a character. It's a perfect example of a character's physical movement revealing their internal movement. Potter has crossed a line, and in doing so has fully awakened something in George. This is the tipping point, the moment when George's selfish desires are drowned out by his need to defend those he cares about. As the hero is stirred up in George, we find him moving even further along the line, shifting from defending his father to defending the people of Bedford Falls.
Wait for what? Until their children grow up and leave them, until they're so old and broken down that you know how long it takes a working man to save $5,000?
In this moment, we realize these noble beliefs have always been inside George, but they needed to be called out. They needed to be awakened, to face a threat strong enough to move him from selfishness to selflessness. This is why the setup to George's monologue is so effective. We know firsthand that George doesn't want to be here, but he is moved to action, first to defend his father and then to defend the people of his hometown. There's an indignation that rises up in him, an indignation at seeing human beings created in the image of God being treated like cattle. He cannot watch humans being treated with contempt.
Just remember this, Mr. Potter, that this rabble you're talking about, they do most of the working and paying and living and dying in this community. Well, is it too much to have them work and pay and live and die in a couple of decent rooms and a bath?
In this scene, George is compelled to be the champion of right. Earlier, we discussed the conflict between the ideas represented by Potter and Peter Bailey. In this moment, we see George take on the mantle of his deceased father in one of the most brilliant moments of blocking you'll ever see in film.
Anyway, my father didn't think so.
As George moves in front of the picture of his father, there's an understanding that he's now stepping in to serve as the champion his father once was. George will now represent the idea of human respect and decency and fight against Potter's idea of human commodities.
People were human beings to him, but to you, a warped, frustrated old man, they're cattle.
George has fully shifted from selfishness to nobility, moved to heroism by a love for his father and his neighbors. Before George steps in, there is no one to represent an opposing view to Potter's. George is compelled to be the embodiment of that opposing view, to champion the idea that people deserve dignity and respect, not because of their net worth, but because they are human beings. This scene works because it's human. We all know what it's like to be selfish, to not want to rock the boat, to resist action that will inconvenience ourselves. But scenes like this call to the good and decent and selfless in us. They remind us of this fundamental truth. Greater love hath no man than this, that he laid down his life for his friends. This is how you write a protagonist. This is how you write a hero. In putting this essay together, I was struck by the depth and complexity of George Bailey as a protagonist. If you'd like to see a more thorough breakdown of his character journey in a future video, let me know in the comments. So I hope this helps. Comment below with your favorite scene of a character moved to heroism, and follow for more writing tips.